Welcome to the Filmumentaries podcast, episode 26. This is Jamie Benning talking to you, as usual, from my house here in southeast London. It's the middle of May 2021 and it's pouring down. There's thunder and lightning, but we have a nice, warm, breezy conversation ahead for this episode. If you're new to the podcast, do go back and check out some of my previous episodes. In fact, I created a little trailer a while ago for some other podcasts that offered to cross-promote my podcast, so why don't I just run that to give you some idea of what's come before this episode. Join me, Jamie Benning, on the Filmumentaries podcast, particularly if you enjoy stories like designer Nilo Rodis Jamiro convincing George Lucas to push him around to help gain the support of his crew on the ailing Howard the Duck.
Blam! The door opens, it's George. Everybody gasps. George makes a beeline to me. I'm literally back against the wall.
Or hear puppeteer Tim Rose's emotional story behind that iconic Admiral Akbar shot in Return of the Jedi.
I believe that war is something to be proud of, but not to celebrate.
Or how Star Wars editor Paul Hirsch tackled cutting so many successful films.
The thing that I learned from working with De Palma is that tension depends on a clock. You need to have the sense that time is running out.
Maybe Oscar-winning sound designer Mark Mangini's insightful chat about his work on Blade Runner 2049.
Not a single sound from the original Blade Runner in the new film. A great deal of inspiration.
That's the Filmumentaries podcast with me, Jamie Benning. Now on to this episode, number 26. I speak with digital matte artist Jim Maxwell. You might know him from Twitter, he posts some great stuff on there, or from some of the stuff he did with Red Letter Media. I must confess, I hadn't seen any of that. Or indeed you might know him from his work on TV and film, which is of course the content of this conversation we're about to have. Jim and I had a nice chat in which he described afterwards as just two guys chatting over a pint. I think we were both drinking tea in reality, but I like that description because that's what I always intended with this podcast. If you do like the podcast, please remember you can support me in its production by contributing via Patreon, patreon.com/Jamie Benning. So just $12 a year would make a massive difference to me and my ability to focus on doing this. Thanks to my one new patron since the last episode. I'm really grateful as usual, and it's always a surprise to get that support and humbly received. Well, one last thing before we get into the conversation, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Martin Cooper, who's a freelance audio engineer. I work with him at Formula One, and he's just always so positive about my podcast. I think he's like my number one listener. So cheers, Coops. Keep listening, keep giving me feedback, good or bad, and I really appreciate it, mate. So here's my chat with Jim Maxwell, digital matte artist, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Jim, when did you first understand what a matte painting was?
Probably about the age of 6 or 7, which is pretty young. I saw Star Wars when I was 6 years old, so there were a lot of behind the scenes VFX specials on television at the time showing all these glass paintings with actual oil paint on them to extend the sets and things like that. But also I've mentioned this before, but my parents would be watching Gone with the Wind, and I recognized that it wasn't just a painted backdrop, that there was something else going on, and that it was a painted extension of the set, which is effectively what a matte painting is like a photorealistic representation of a reality, the reality in the film, but cost effective because they can never build sets that big, like giant castles or whatever. So they build them 15 feet up off the ground, and an artist is there on set with a piece of glass and just paints realistically that extension. But I was always painting and drawing when I was a kid, so and I loved film, so it was a kind of easy marriage of interests.
And in those early movies, they would have the matte painting actually on location or on set, and film and line the camera up.
Strapped down and nailed into like a wooden frame. And I mean, there are different techniques like latent matte painting images eventually, but the old school ones were painted on glass on set, so the camera would shoot behind the piece of glass, and then the partial set would be on the other side of the glass. But through the camera lens, it just lined up perfectly. I think the first one was the Missions of California or something by Norman Don. It was like 1907 was the very first glass matte painting. So it's been around for quite a while.
What a canny use of available technologies as well to, like you say, make it cost effective. And suddenly you've got, maybe a castle that's partly rubble. You can just build upon it and take it back to its former glory.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean it extended on to I guess the 1990s were some of the last glass matte paintings were before everything went digital.
Yeah, I am always amazed that every so often there comes that wave of people who suddenly go, hang on, wait, they're matte paintings in Star Wars? They're just so used to seeing those establishing shots of the Death Star and... Absolutely.
It's funny that those paintings, some of them don't hold up necessarily. You can see the brush strokes. But I mean, my favorite out of all those is the Bespin landing platform that Ralph McQuarrie did. It's just flawless. It just... I know how they did it, but at the same time, I'm still like, I don't know how they did that. I don't know how he got such a realistic painting.
Yeah, and there's some great footage of him, which I think is on that long lost The Making of Empire Strikes Back that was dug up a couple of years ago that never got broadcast, and you see him there kind of working away on it and just adding the highlights on the little domed buildings in the background. And
your research is perfect for that, because you managed to drag up stuff I've never seen, and I'm always on the lookout for this stuff. So like archaeology, right?
Yeah, it is really, and that's what I always find fascinating about this stuff, that you get just another little insight into that world. And the same with talking to people on the podcast. That's what it's all about for me, to just better understand it. And we were talking just before we started recording that I can name a bunch of matte artists off the top of my head, like Mike Pangrazio, Chris Evans, Peter and Harrison Ellenshaw, Caroline Green on Temple of Doom, and Sid Dutton on Cape Fear. And it's one of those arts that I think that once people kind of understand what it is, it does pull people in, it intrigues people. But your job, of course, is to not take the audience out of that moment. You have to stay within that moment. So what techniques do you use then in the digital realm that that can stop people from being pulled out of that moment and make sure they're still engaged?
Well, I mean, I think the best friend to a matte painter is the great photo reference, and if it's taken on the set or on location of where the film is actually being shot, then all the better. I worked on The Last Airbender, the M. Night Shyamalan movie, and they had so much, like ILM had so much reference footage and reference photography of the Arctic. So it's no wonder, I mean, the movie wasn't that great or anything, but a lot of the shots are really beautifully composed. And so much of that has to do with really great photo reference. You can be a great artist or a good artist and cobble stuff together from the internet or from your own private resources of photos. But it's so cost effective and time saving if someone actually goes to maybe a location similar to what needs to be, represented as a matte painting and take those photographs. They did that a lot for Game of Thrones. There was I did a university talk about I think it was about Dragonstone, one of the locations, and they pulled from 5 different geological, like, rocks and mountain locations in Ireland. So 5 different locations for photo reference, just so that they could sell this one environment. And I think when you do go that extra length, it really ends up being so successful.
I guess drawing from reality is the best bet there, in a way, because we are quite a discerning audience these days, aren't we? And
absolutely.
we can notice these things. As you said, some of those early matte paintings do look a bit rough now, particularly in the realm that we're in now with 4K scans and 8K scans.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the way TV's going now. Is I mean, the show I'm on right now is 4K.
Yeah.
So you can't I can't even get away. So Vikings Valhalla is what I'm working on now. And it's 4K, so I can't get away with certain resolutions that I was using on Vikings because I worked on every season of that show. So, and eventually I can see, 5 years down the road, everyone's going to have 8K televisions.
Yeah.
And then all these films are going to have to be rescanned and, put out on 8K Blu-ray or whatever now.
But budgets won't be changed for matte painting. You'll just have to work twice as hard.
Yeah. But, Vikings is a good example of photo reference because they shoot it in Ireland, as well as other countries. If they're, going to the desert or something, they'll shoot in Morocco or something like that. But Norway is shot in Ireland. But our visual effects supervisor in the first year went to Norway and did like a recce and a big photo shoot of the fjords. So we always had kind of reference, that reference to lean on, to use. And for the most part, it's been great. But, now, again, the resolution has to be that much higher. So, I when I'm in Photoshop, I'm looking at everything at 200% now, as opposed to, 66.7. And I've also doubled the plate. So I've doubled the plate resolution. You've also got overscan if there's camera movement. And then, I found that looking at it at 100% in Photoshop, like the matte painting I'm working on, things look great. If I look at it at 200%, I can see cut marks or just little minor mistakes I've made that just are not going to hold up when, something's on Netflix or whatever. So there is that extra degree of attention.
In the way that, when I think of those, I think particularly Return of the Jedi, where they started doing multiple live action spots in the matte painting, like you think of the Ewok village or that Rebel hangar, where they just try and draw the eye to a different area, to just so you're sort of drawn away from maybe the roughness of the painting.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a shame that suggestion isn't there anymore, that you can't have that suggestion, and unless there is a sort of sweeping camera move that you can get away with. But yeah, that Michael Pangrazio hangar bay where he had I think a couple of workers at ILM walk towards the A-wing or whatever that's painted into the picture, and it totally pulls your eye.
With the circle on the floor, the yellow circle on the floor sort of blended in. I mean, crazy work at the time.
And great design work. And that's the thing about those matte paintings is they work because they were designed so well. And if you look at the storyboards, some of them are relatively identical.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking about, even though we're kind of used to seeing matte paintings for kind of establishing shots, like here we are, this is the location, it's the wide shot. Yeah. And as you say, it might be an extension, it might be a completely, made up shot in the computer these days. But there also is used for matte painting in pretty much any shot. I think again about Return of the Jedi, there's a couple in there that until I did my Returning to Jedi video, I didn't even know they were matte paintings. I think it's where there's a couple of speeder bikes or something, and there's a couple of troopers on the floor.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Kind of cut out the part of the picture, and it's about 50% live action, 50% matte painting, and you just wouldn't know.
No, absolutely.
Do you still get involved with shots like that now, where you're literally just tweaking maybe a small portion of the frame?
Sure. I mean, it's so much. There are so many shots. Like they're just the amount is staggering. And that would intimidate me if they were all castles or, all cathedrals or something like that. But there's so much cleanup work involved as well, like painting out maybe cast or crew or something, or like painting out the crew or camera equipment. Maybe, and there's always modernisms like car tracks, like tire tracks that, in a same medieval setting or in a Viking setting, isn't, or antenna, radio antennas or, modern buildings. So there's always, anachronism, paint outs and fixes like that as a daily part of the job. And it's good. I mean, because especially after you've worked on maybe an intense matte painting, you've got 8 of these cleanup things where you can just turn your brain off and just, go to town and get them out. But it's funny, you'd mentioned something and it brought to mind, a lot of television matte paintings that are, equivalent to film matte paintings, in quality now. There doesn't seem to be much of a separation. But one thing I was going to say is I love shots that are designed where they start on the matte painting and go off the matte painting. And I like those so much more, and I think they're a better design than the matte paintings and I can read them a mile away based on the camera move. So it's like a bunch of horses, and they're going up a steep hill, and you're traveling with them, and the camera is going to mount that hill, and you just know on the other side of that is matte painting. And it's when you have a shot that ends on a matte painting, to me, it's just so obvious. The big reveal, right? And we see it in films and things like that.
I know the shot.
But it's just, there's that much more pressure to make it look realistic, which I'm happy to, take up the challenge.
When you mentioned antennas then a minute ago, it brought to my mind that that shot in Raiders where they're up on the top of the buildings there in Tunisia, supposedly Egypt.
Yeah.
And, in the documentary footage, there's producer Robert Watts talking about how they had to remove like 300 real
television antennas.
Because presumably Steven Spielberg wanted a sweeping shot, and you couldn't have done that with a matte painting at the time.
Cairo, City of the Living, right?
That's it, yeah. And I guess the palette is really kind of open now. The toolkit is really open as in terms of matte painting and what you can do. Have you had to therefore really kind of integrate 3D elements to your work now? How does that work?
It's funny because I was always told to learn 3D, when I was trying to get into it in the first place. Learn 3D, learn compositing software, and learn Photoshop. So with 3D, you have Maya, 3D Studio Max, Houdini, and, compositing, you have Nuke, which is pretty standard now. And, I've done shots where I actually composited them. I've completed shots where I did a lot of the 3D and projected my images onto the 3D geometry, and then someone's done the tracking for that shot. So say it's a sweeping 180 degree shot. So they take my elements and bring them in because they've already got a track, like a digital track to follow the camera move. But, I started not focusing on compositing. I've never enjoyed compositing. The people that do it are great at it, and they love the problem solving aspect of it. But I did do a lot of 3D, like X-Men Origins Wolverine. I projected, textures and matte painting elements onto 3 Mile Island for the night shot. And that was a great experience because I think there was only 3 or 4 of us on that shot. And one of my closest friends, Kieran O'Connor, did the compositing for that. So we were the 2 main people I think there's 3 of those shots. And that's what pleases me the most in this industry, is to work on something where it's really challenging, but it's a small number of people on it, because you feel not so much authorship, but just, it's your work that's in there, as opposed to every 2 seconds in Rise of Skywalker. There's a massive visual effects shot with thousands upon thousands of people working on it. And, they deserve to have their credits, and they deserve to get recognition for that. But there's just so much volume, it just gets lost. So when you have maybe a show where the visual effects are not so much smaller, but less volume. So for instance, what I'm working on now, it's a real delight to put your best work into it, knowing that, maybe there's 2 or 3 of you working on that one shot. That's the most satisfying thing to me these days. And I've been working in Photoshop more than anything now, and less 3D for now.
Yeah. It's nice when you know that it's got your stamp on it. You can actually say that bit's mine.
I mean, I used to be obnoxious, like we all did, but you'd be working under terrible working conditions with terrible bosses, so you just start putting your initials, painting them in here and there. And I remember I worked on a movie called I'm just laughing because it's pretty funny. I worked on a movie called The Sentinel with Michael Douglas and Kiefer Sutherland.
Oh yeah,
and
I remember that movie.
And painted the backdrop. I went down to Washington D.C. actually to shoot some background plates for this sort of 360 degree view of the White House, and then stitch them together. But I ended up putting Luke's land speeder in there and a piece of the Millennium Falcon, and because you could be worked to death, I saw Phil Tippett do a talk at TIFF, and got to hang out and have beers with him afterwards. And he said George Lucas in the old days at ILM said, I think said to him, yeah, you know what? You just have to give these guys pizza and beer and they'll do anything for
Wow.
you. So they would just work these crazy long hours just
Yeah.
because there was pizza and beer and they had, good camaraderie.
Yeah.
So we'd occasionally have pizza and beer, but not, it was a little different. So yeah,
But,
no,
but
I don't
those
do
guys
that.
those guys would get their little kind of in jokes in there, wouldn't they? Like I think of like the sneaker instead of it was a potato instead of an asteroid, wasn't it? A sneaker instead of a shit.
Potato and it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Steve Golly, I think, did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a coping mechanism when things are so stressful,
Yeah. It's somehow you're putting a bit of yourself back in there.
Yeah, a little bit of rebellion in there too,
And you worked for ILM at some point then.
I mean, that was kind of the goal. I was the nerdy kid that had a Skywalker Ranch T-shirt when I was 14. And it was either wanting to work for Disney to paint backdrops or working for Lucasfilm. And it says in my high school yearbook, plans for the future, and it's like to work at Lucasfilm Studios or whatever. But I think it was about 8 years into me working as a matte painter in Toronto when I finally got a phone interview with them, and it was an amazing experience. It was a 4-month contract, and I mean, there were a lot of people who they just see it as a job, but for me, I'd read about all these people, and I think you're on that same level of sensible fandom where you appreciate the behind the scenes and the crafts people behind it, as opposed to every name of every single alien or whatever in the series. Like, I'm not interested in that. I love the old trilogy and how things were put together and made. So
yeah, if I always say if there wasn't an action figure of it, I don't know the name.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, some of the old guard were still there, and my first meeting, there was maybe 5 or 6 of us in the meeting, and Yusei Westgate, who's been a longtime Lucasfilm matte painter, was there, and Paul Houston, who helped build the Death Star, the Millennium Falcon. The funny thing is, before I'd even started, so I was just staying in a hotel before I got my accommodations, I saw a really tall guy walking down the street towards me, and I wasn't supposed to start work until I think 2 days in San Francisco. And he got closer, and I was like, "Oh my goodness!" I said, "Excuse me, are you Paul Houston?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "Oh, I'm Jim Maxwell. I'm coming to work for ILM on a 4-month contract." And we chatted a bit, and then he said, "Well, I'll see you at work," and that was really nice. And since that point, I didn't see him a lot, but like he kind of confided in me, and we'd talk about movies, and he'd talk about all these little extra models and things that he would build for reference that he would use in ILM, visual effects shots, and he'd be like, "Don't tell anyone this." So I guess I've already broken his trust right now by saying that, but no. And he would talk to me. He was on set for the film I worked on when I was there, and he would say, "Here, the photographic reference for you," and he would, bring them to me or show me where it was. I walked by his office and saw Jared Diamond's Collapse, I think it was, the book, and I was reading the book as well. So it was just these little things where we'd have little chats. And my second last day, he invited me to lunch, just the two of us. So we went out for lunch and sat and talked about model railroads the whole time. And I forgot who I was talking to, where I'd start arguing with him and saying, "Well, I think actually grain of wheat bulbs were better to use for that kind of lighting," or whatever the thing was. But and then I pulled back and I'd be like, "Wait a second, I have to show some respect and remember who I'm talking to." But no, it was fantastic.
What was the movie?
The Last Airbender.
Oh, it was.
So
yeah.
And I'm glad you asked, because I have a funny story about that. We went into one of ILM's many auditoriums, and I think there were maybe 20 of us, and I know more people were working on the film than that. But so standing in front of us, I guess, this is a movie theater at ILM, but standing in front of the screen is M. Night Shyamalan. And off to the side, looking really awkward with folded arms, is Frank Marshall, who produced the film. And M. Night Shyamalan says, "Thank you for coming this morning to this meeting. I really need you guys to save this film."
Oh, no.
And, for people that have seen the film, I think there's a lot of prejudice because it's, the anime Avatar: The Last Airbender is beloved. So, to try to make a film based on that. And I could tell he wasn't happy with it, So it was nice of him to be honest with us. That said, I think there's a lot of really beautiful shots in the film. So that was what I worked on mainly. And ILM was so we're talking about dream job and that kind of thing. But, with that, it comes the good and the bad. And it was a really tense place, and I think attitudes had changed since the Star Wars prequels. And, a lot of people weren't happy, and, there wasn't maybe as much happiness there as there was when they were making The Phantom Menace. I think, when that production was going on, it was like old times again, a new Star Wars film. And then, feeling that maybe the movies weren't as artistically successful as the originals. It almost seemed like there was a bit of a cloud. And I talked to, my friends who worked there, and, they would say as much, but it could be really tense. I remember the supervisor asking one of my friends, "What are you working on?" Saying it really loudly, and everyone in the mat department could hear it. And my friend said, "What am I not working on?" Because, he's just overloaded with so many shows. And then the supervisor said, "That's not what I asked you." Just really cold. And there was a lot of that, a lot of tension and a lot of heads down, just working, getting through, the working day. And it was, honestly, it was kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
Because you felt like you could get fired at any moment. But
do you think that was down to the fact that they'd just taken too much work on in that period? Is that the sense you got?
Possibly. It could have been that, that they were in such, there was Weta Digital as well. So I think there was a lot of competition going on to, maintain being the best in the world and the track record and the history of the place. But yeah, there were a lot of shows going on. I think Iron Man 2 was going on at the same time. They just finished Avatar. So I could see all the shots from Avatar on people's monitors. Because I think they were bringing around, they'd always bring someone around to give a tour of the place, to get the job, to work on that director's film or whatever. But yeah, it's funny, I'm not complaining when I'm saying this, but my monitor died on me, I think in the first 2 weeks. My chair broke because it was an old chair. My keyboard stopped working. And I think my desk, the leg of the desk broke off. And it, this is before Disney bought ILM, but I just laughed at it. But it was, it was an interesting environment. But, that said, there were also great times. Like, when I signed the contract, it said absolutely no alcohol on the premises. And I think every week there was some booze fest going on where, if it wasn't for, the change in the president and champagne everywhere, just, flutes of champagne all over the corridors. And there was at the Last Airbender Matt Department production office, there was a Wookiee beer tap that people would just walk in and they'd fill up with beer.
That's part of the history of ILM as well, though. You
I think
look at
so,
those old pictures from '76, and they're all in those tubs outside in Van Nuys.
Yeah, exactly.
And, with beers on, and
and then again, at the same time, what I was saying about tension, like John Knoll and Dennis Muren were in my daily sessions, and they'd playfully argue, and Dennis would say, what these people need to do is look at the real world. Go outside right now. Go look at what this looks like. And John Knoll would say, well, we're using this rendering engine, and, this is blah, 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 blah. And they'd be having the digital versus real world kind of fight in front of me, which was pretty funny. And then finally I said, what do you think of this shot? I had a fun moment with Dennis Muren. I said, where was the speeder bike chase filmed in Return of the Jedi? And he said, go get me a map. So I got him a paper map, and he pointed out this place called Cheatham Grove, and discussed was it Garrett Brown, the Steadicam operator, and the line they used, and walked through the path. So I went up there and took photographs and brought them back, and he said, "Yeah, you found it." It's so really nice moments. I remember when I was leaving, I said, "Yeah, I got to go back to Toronto," and he was like, "Oh well," kind of like. We're like, I walk by and chat in his office now and again, and he recognized me. And, he was just kind of like, okay, I guess you gotta go, whatever. But everyone was really
you as
nice.
One of the good guys, maybe,
I don't know. I was enthusiastic, I suppose, without being too annoying. But Yusei Westgate was a great map painter. Last Crusade, Forrest Gump. He worked on so many of the projects. He would say good morning to me every morning, and same with Paul Houston. The funny thing is, back like 10 years before this, I called ILM, when you could find their number in the phone book. And I said, hello, can I speak to the Matt department, please? And they put me through, and Caroline Green answered. So I chatted with her, and I said, what software should I learn? And she said, Photoshop, this, that. Here, I'll pass you on to someone else. And she passed me on to Yusei. And I said, oh, hi, Mr. Westgate. My name is Jim Maxwell. I want to be a map painter, asking about the software. And the first thing he said was, how did you get this number? And he gave me a bit of advice. But then when I was actually working with him, I told him the story. And he said, when he said, where did you get this number? And then he said, I hope that's not all I said. Like, he was, hoped that he was being encouraging.
Yeah.
But, just to be in that environment after all that time was pretty fantastic. And I got to meet George at the end.
Yeah. We're just about at the halfway point of my chat with Jim Maxwell, digital matte artist. We'll be back after these short messages.
Are you tired of pop culture podcasts where the hosts exist in a constant, blissful state of agreement? Well, fear not. Let me introduce you to the Chinstroker versus Punter podcast. Mike is an ex-film student with a penchant for David Lynch, and Paul is your man on the street who likes what he knows and knows what he likes. Join us fortnightly as we discuss what we've been watching from our own very different perspectives. You can find us at csvsp.libsyn.com. Chinstroker versus Punter is a proud member of the Pod Syndicate family of podcasts.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
The Projection Booth is single-handedly the greatest film podcast you could ever listen to or could possibly want.
Top notch. 5 stars. This has quickly become one of my favorite film-related podcasts. Always interesting.
A completely unpretentious yet fully comprehensive look at films from all genres.
The Projection Booth podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
If you want to get involved in the filmmaking industry but don't know where to start, check out raindance.org. Raindance is not only a film festival, but also somewhere that you can sign up for training and courses in subjects like acting, directing, producing. There are short courses and full-time degrees, and if you quote Jamie10, that's JAMIE10, you can get 10% off. So check out raindance.org to see what catches your eye, and maybe you'll get that job you've always dreamed of. And then maybe you can come on the podcast.
There's nothing like a global pandemic to put health in the spotlight. If you're ready to improve yours but finding it a struggle, I can help. I'm a health coach, which means that I understand behaviour change. I can help you articulate what it is you really want for yourself and build a personalised plan to help you get there, with troubleshooting support included. As of May 2021, you can book an initial 1-hour session with a series of half-hour follow-ups for only £15 each, which is better than half price. The offer is due to close in mid-July 2021. Book a free consultation to explore the possibilities at beccabenning.com.
And now back to my chat with Jim Maxwell. I met George briefly as well. He came.
Was he smiling?
He was all right. I was at a Formula One Grand Prix, which is like the work I've been doing in live TV for 20 years or so.
And no surprise that he'd be there.
Yeah, he loves his racing. And I'd seen him a few times, but I was always working when I saw him on the monitors and things. But this one time I went for a walk down the pit lane, and there he was with his wife. And my friend said to me, "You've got to talk to him. This is your opportunity." He said, "Give me your phone, I'll take some pictures." And I just went up to him and I just thought, oh God, I'm going to say the same thing that a million people have said. You've been an inspiration to me, blah, blah, blah. And he said, oh, that's great, and he said, oh, what do you do? He pointed at I was wearing my uniform, and I said, oh, I work in the TV production. And I said, what team are you here with? And I think he was there with Williams F1, and we just had like a 2 or 3 minute chat. And then I said, look, I don't want to keep you, you're having a day off kind of thing. So, and that was it. And my friend, being a complete prick, was winding me up. He took the pictures so that I was just framed out. But he did also take some with me in, but he didn't give them to me until the following day, I think.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Just to kind of piss me off.
Yeah, I kept bumping into him. I mean, I'd see him in the hallways, and an elevator closed before I could get in. It was him, George, that was in it. But he bumped his elbow into me the time where they had the champagne everywhere, which was kind of funny. But it was my second last day, I think, second last day, and someone came up to me and said, Jim, George's downstairs. You should go meet him. This is your chance, because they knew, I planned to leave. And it was a charity event, and his whole family was there. And the nice thing about it was, when you see photos of him, he just looks fed up, with paparazzi or whoever's taking photos. But he was smiling the whole time. And I had a beer in my hand, and, because they're celebrating this charity event, and they're playing games and trivia games and things like that. And it was in the Lucasfilm cafeteria, which is this huge place with a giant high ceiling. And so I just looked and thought about it. And then I saw George on his own filling his plate with food. and I just casually went, George. And he turned and put his head down and filled more food in his plate, and then walked up towards me, and his son walked behind him. And I started blurting out, George, I'm Jim Maxwell. I'm in the Digimat department. They've offered me an extension, but I can't take it because my wife doesn't want to move to San Francisco. And he said, or my fiance. And he said, I know what that's like. And I didn't question him on it, but I was wondering if it was something to do with Marshall Lucas, or maybe just trying to drag everyone up to San Francisco instead of staying in Van Nuys, for the original ILM building and all that. Anyway, and I said, look, I just wanted to say thank you for everything. And he did a little bow and held out his hand and gave me a really firm handshake.
Yeah.
And then I said, it was really great. And he was smiling the whole time, because he could tell I was kind of babbling and nervous. Whatever. But it's the one moment you don't want to screw up.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I was kind of aware when I spoke to him that he was kind of in his element. He's there for racing. And I kind of...
Yeah.
I didn't mention, I briefly mentioned, I said, you've been a big inspiration to me, to the point that I've made my own films about your films. And he was like, oh, that's great, And then we just went straight onto the racing, or I went straight into the racing, because I knew that was the kind of common ground right there. And then he kind of lit up at that point.
Oh, that's great.
Which was nice. But he's one of those guys, isn't he, that, really should never have ended up in the position he ended up in, because he ended up becoming the studio that he was fighting against. And I think in some ways that's why he sold to Disney, because that burden on his shoulders was just like, I need to get rid of this.
Sure. And also, being thrust into that, or being put in that place where, he's a soft-spoken guy that doesn't like to talk a lot. He doesn't like to talk to a lot of people, but he's in this position where he has to. Which is completely, seemingly opposite to what he wants to do, because he'd rather be in an editing bay or something. But, no, that's nice. Yeah. I mean, it was a good experience. And, I'm sure like you're just kind of looking at him talking, but not feeling like you're in the same place, in the same room.
Not processing it properly.
Yeah. Celebrity is a weird thing. I mean, my whole thing with it is I want to break it down just to realize that these are normal people, and they just had success. And, being at somewhere like ILM, I was, oh, here's James Gandolfini walking down the hallway past me. And, James Cameron's in the Matt department kitchen. Go say hi, which I didn't, because I couldn't be bothered. But, it was a great, they'd have great events. Quentin Tarantino came in to do a talk that I missed because it was just too busy. Roger Elswit, who's cinematographer on There Will Be Blood, did a really great presentation. And I got to ask him about fusing the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s lenses to the camera for the train scene, just so they were, Paul Thomas Anderson wanted authenticity, so that's what he gave him. And Harrison Ford came in one time. He was that doctor movie with Brendan Fraser that's a big meme on the internet. I Already Work Around the Clock, whatever that movie.
I've seen all of Harrison's movie except that one.
Yeah. Well, I saw it, but he walked out as soon as the lights went down.
Yeah, right.
But he was up at the podium and looked around the theater and said, he said something like, this place was built because of the money I generated for it, or something really cynical like that.
Yeah, he's got a great dry sense of humor.
Yeah, and he got a really good laugh. But,
yeah, he's a guy I think I would kind of, stumble over a little bit in terms of his celebrity. I mean, George obviously as big a figure, but Harrison, has just got this kind of gruff. If he doesn't want to talk, he's just going to tell you to, sing your hook, whatever phrase he chooses. Yeah, and you just have to take it. It's very cool though to be in that environment and be around all of that kind of history. Kind of disappointing in a way that you were there at a point where it sort of reached this sort of critical mass by the sounds of it. And
I think so, yeah.
Because I was talking to some of the people there was a guy I spoke to called Pat McClung, who was in the sort of model making department on The Empire Strikes Back, and he was talking about how through the 80s up to the early 90s, before the kind of digital arrived in full force with Jurassic Park, I guess, there was just this kind of soft interchange between the different effects houses. Everyone knew everyone. It was quite a small community. But then when you get like a powerhouse like, as you said, Weta or someone like that, who've come along with the Lord of the Rings movies, suddenly I could imagine ILM were just sitting up and going, okay, we need the next step now. We need to, sort of use that pressure to develop the next thing. Did you have any sense of that when you were there, that they were innovating, still trying to innovate to that level that they've been known for?
Yeah, Richard Bluff, who was my supervisor, he created the opening scene for Avatar, which is the camera gliding through the mist, and they were always checking out what the newest software was, and I think at the time Maxwell was a really big lighting rendering system. I've never even used it, so I don't know, but there was always discussion about what would be good for this. We're going to switch over to this 3D platform instead of this one, but they also had their own proprietary software as well, which I was told I had to learn, and I went to these classes to learn it, to just keep updated on it. And then I was told by my manager, who's different than my supervisor, no, we just want you to work in Photoshop here. I was like, but I was told I needed to work in Xeno, which was their proprietary software. And I was like, no, don't worry about that stuff. And then, the supervisor would come by and tell me to work in Xeno and get that going. And so I was just, all right.
I guess at least you came away with the sort of transferable skills, like with Photoshop and Maya and using things rather than some proprietary.
I think so. Yeah. I think I'm happiest that they offered me an extension that I couldn't take by the end.
That's
so
a
at
nice
least it wasn't just like, you're done, get out of here.
Yeah. It's like you called off the relationship.
Yeah.
I gave my Twitter followers an opportunity to ask you a few questions, so I'll fire them at you now in a random order. Tom Gregory asked, "How do you go about matching the lighting in your paintings to match the live action portions? Do you get is that the reference material that you require?"
I think so. So, I mean, if it's an overcast day, or if it's a sunny day. Obviously, I'll have to gather reference with, an accurate key light. So where's the sun in the sky? What side of the tree is it hitting? Well, obviously, I can use this photograph because it looks similar, or cut out these trees and sometimes paint it in, like painting in the lighting. Overcast is usually pretty easy, right? Because there's contact shadows on the ground that you would have to be responsible for, but there's no real highlights or hot key lights or highlights or anything like that. And again, there's certain lookup tables and preset lighting systems to apply to your shot. Like when you get the plates in and you're working on them, usually I'll take the first plate and the last plate of the footage because the camera's probably moving all around the place. But usually the first, the middle, and the last is probably the best place to start painting on. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think so. I just wondered as well, what do you prefer, working on a matte that has live action elements in it, or do you like one that's purely generated in the computer and you've got full artistic license, I guess?
Yeah, if there's live action in it, I just worked on something that I'm not really allowed to talk about, but it has live action in it that crosses the matte line, so they have to be rotoscoped out, or when there's people in it, it's more believable, especially if they cross over what you've painted.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's standalone, without anyone in it, and it's an establishing shot, then all you've got is maybe someone's moving the trees around a bit, or you've got wind, or some kind of vapor, or something to make it look alive. But if it's a still establishing shot, then it's hard to make it convincing sometimes.
Yeah, I was used to sort of chuckle. There was a period where you just see birds, like there'd always be birds flying past, like a flock of birds.
And I always felt that the Lord of the Rings, the Argonath scene with the two kings. I just wish they didn't have the birds.
Yeah,
because I don't know. It's fine now. It's kind of cute, but
I always kind of found that those shots were in the Lord of the Rings movies where they sweep through a location, where they're digging and forging the warriors and things. They always took me out of the movie. I'd rather just have a traditional kind of matte shot with some animation in it, because I don't know, there's just something about an impossible shot that takes me out of the movie when it shouldn't, because if I'm thinking about the camera, surely that's taking me out of the movie. Anyway, there's something going on there that doesn't work for me.
There was a spat of a decade, I think, where you get nothing but these 180-degree sort of helicopter shots over a location that couldn't possibly exist. And Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or one of the Narnia films, there's a lot of it in Lord of the Rings, and it's like, well, where is the camera exactly? Yeah, like, how is there a helicopter in this period?
Yeah, and you think about sort of traditional filmmaking, you don't always have to have an establishing wide shot. You can go straight into someone's apartment, and that can be just as powerful. So yeah, it's just a kind of trope of those kind of movies we're talking about. Chris Wooten asked, what's the most subtle example of your work?
Let me think. I mean, it's always the shots that don't look like matte paintings or visual effects shots.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. There's one I did in Mr. and Mrs. Smith of a sort of a building under construction, and the elevator being under construction. The camera just like starts at it and then pans off it, and I wouldn't even question it. But there's a few in that movie, actually. There's a hotel room I had to actually create out of scratch, and it was a last minute situation. So I threw like magazines on the bed with like my image on them, and with little like stories like depression in the workplace,
Nice.
all these sort of things like that. But I don't know if anyone would question that one. So if anyone wants to look at the hotel shot in Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
But that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because you're not only matte artist, you're set decorator as well. You're art director there as well. So you
in a rare situation like that, absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Lisa asked, does he have a favourite genre to work in? And is there a danger of being pigeonholed in your industry?
Oh, I don't think so.
No,
no one cares about mapping or so much about being pigeonholed. But no,
nobody says, this guy's really good at doing fantasy. This guy's really good at doing sci-fi.
Well, I don't know. That's a good question, because I don't know why they chose me for the Curb Your Enthusiasm shot.
Oh, yeah.
Because the place I was working at the time, I think, had maybe 20 map painters at the time. And I wasn't that busy. It could have been just that, or it's just like, Jim can, burn down a building, or, whatever this looks like.
That was the last series, right? That was 2020, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And that was great. I mean, that was so much fun. It's like Luke Groves and Aaron Weintraub that deserve that, because they gave me the shot. But what was the question again?
Sorry, I just before I say what the question was again, I just want to say that it's all very exciting that you work for ILM and met George Lucas, but I mean, Curb Your Enthusiasm, come on.
I know, right?
that's up there, come on.
And the scene itself is hilarious.
Yeah, it's great.
So I'm doing a map painting in a really comical scene.
It's the whole Spite store thing, isn't it? The Spite Cafe and with Mocha Joe. It doesn't get much better than that. Lisa asked about the danger of being pigeonholed, and what is your favourite genre?
Right, the genre, yeah. So I do really like the sort of medieval stuff and the Viking stuff a lot. Not because I can't paint architecture or modern stuff, but if I was to do science fiction, which I've done, I'm more prone to, or would look more forward to doing concept work as opposed to a finished shot, because there's so much involved in rendering and geometry and interactive lighting. And, looking at something like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, there's so many visual effects shots, just constant, whether it's, flying by buildings with explosions being reflected in them. And it's just so busy. So I'm not a fan of working on something that's super busy and super, filling the screen. I would rather do like quiet, more almost what seems like traditional matte painting, where the camera isn't flying around and it's a little more still. So you've got more of a chance to create a bit of nuance and take care and finesse, and make something look real that it disappears. But occasionally there's a moment where I can, whether it's a castle or whatever, to, add my own signature to it, where, like the Vatican in the Borgias, that image that you had just shown me, something like that is great. First of all, someone's built the geometry for me. So really I'm just painting. So I'm creating a new background for it, and I'm painting texture onto the geometry. And in a shot like that is beautiful because you can see there's tons of people at the bottom in the courtyard, and you can see where the sun angle is. It's like, 25 after or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so where the key light's going to hit, where the shadow's going to hit. So when you have a key light and a shadow that are very direct like that, it's not that it's easy, but it's less challenging.
Yeah, that's a great shot. That one.
You're gonna it's gonna end up more believable, I think.
I find it interesting that you work on two ends of the spectrum, really, because you work on concept stuff, but also final renderings of matte paintings. I spoke to Nilo Rodis-Jamiro, who worked as an industrial designer on The Empire Strikes Back and costume designer Return of the Jedi. He created like the some of the ships in the Star Trek movies. The Bird of Prey was his idea. He's
right.
He was always talking about how, as a designer and as a concept artist, he just did it very, very roughly and left the details up to the model builders. He said, I don't need to give them details because they'll do the details. How do you sort of work in both realms at the same time? Do you find one or the other easier?
Sometimes I'm asked to do a concept for a shot where it's already been shot. So, I'd see that more as a style frame where I'm creating something where I don't want to throw any work away because I want to use it for the final shot. So if I'm doing something loose and kind of elaborate at the same time, where, it's broad brushstrokes, to get a feel for mood or whatever, it would be more, I would save more time just kind of trying to take it to a middle ground of here's what I'm thinking for the final shot, as opposed to being, because concept work can be so fanciful, right? Yeah. As opposed to grounded in reality, like what you're saying about Nilo Rodis, and just very sketchy. So, this show I'm on right now, I did do some concept work. Some of it was, more anchored down as to, there were rules, that I had to follow. Whereas other stuff, no one really knew what something should look like. So I could be more fanciful in broad strokes, a little looser with the digital brush.
Yeah.
And I'd like to do more of that. But when I get actual footage, sometimes I don't see the point of actually doing a concept for it, because there are so many shots still coming, so it's like time management. And but I love concept work, and I do want to do more of it. It's funny, the art department, I think, is one of the most prime places to be. So if you're on a film set or working in a film, there's your art department where they're coming up with concepts for costume, architecture. How are we going to build this? And you've got your production designer who's telling you this is what's needed here, this is what's needed here. Whereas in visual effects land, you can do concepts, but it's more just sort of a sketch idea for the final visual effects shot versus what the final shot of a film or television show is actually going to be. So, and that was at ILM, for instance, that was the prime location, was to be in the art department because, Mandalorian, for instance, that's where your concepts for, Baby Yoda or whatever are taking place. Whereas, the big danger word to me that I didn't like was generalist. And that's what they were turning a lot of the map painters into at ILM, quite a few years ago, where, the majority of their day would be spent painting Optimus Prime's shin. You know what I mean? Because those things are so elaborate, and so that's not anywhere near my interest for things. But art departments and doing concept art is wonderful. If you can get into that,
And so you work under the art director on a show, and in visual effects, the VFX falls under that as well, does it?
VFX I'd be falling under the visual effects supervisor.
Okay.
But earlier on the show that I'm working on now, I was in discussion, emails back and forth with the production designer of the show, which was fantastic, because his job is to make, you have your cinematographer and you have your director and then you have your production designer. So it's the three people that are deciding, what this is going to be, and the production designer's job is to decide what this is going to look like. How are we going to build this? And, the physical aspect of things versus any additional things. But he also, he would chime in and have a lot of great suggestions about how to extend a set that he designed in real life. And then I'd take it to the digital extension side. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's understanding that palette, isn't it? What's available to you, what tool set you have available. Another question from the Markush. Given his deep love for science fiction, what does he look for in ship designs? It says.
I love sci-fi vehicles that are based on construction vehicles. So you have the yellow paint job that's just battered and dinged, and the rust marks and everything else, and where there's maybe like exhaust ports is all blackened. I love stuff like that. I like the attempt at clean design, but there's wear and tear. And I don't mean sort of, Millennium Falcon style sort of grunge, but even cleaner than that. But you can see that something's not perfect. So that the imperfections of things. Not a huge fan of the Star Trek ship design. I do like the Bird of Prey, like the later Bird of Prey. I like that a lot. I like the Palomino a lot in the Black Hole. I love the Cygnus. I love that. Like people hate that movie, and I just love it. And I love the ship design so much. It's like Victorian, architecture in space.
Yeah, I hated that movie when I saw it, because I remember it was like Disney Star Wars, and I sat down and was like, no, it's not. I revisited it though about a decade ago and did enjoy it.
Good.
Indiana the dog said, do you always have the same process to greatness?
Oh, that's really nice. I don't know about greatness, but it's a pretty boring answer, because the pipeline always changes with map painting, I think. So you could have your concept at the start of it, and then you move that concept into something more workable, and then compositors are given that, and they start working it into the scene. But things can change direction when the shot's almost done, and suddenly you have to go back in. You're sort of 3/4 through the pipeline, then finessing and fixing things, or maybe completely changing the entire look of something. I don't know if that's answering the question. The question seemed vague.
Is it always the same process for you?
Always the same process.
Well, if you said it changes, depending on what's happening, the pipeline, kind of moves, then I guess, you always manage to reach greatness, whatever the process is what Indiana the dog is suggesting here.
The nicest part, the part I like least is the stress, and especially when you manage that badly. The best part is the variety, because I can come across a shot of a certain environment that maybe I've created before and be like, oh, I know how to do this. And you can kind of get it done quicker because you've kind of been there before. But then you'll be thrown something that's you've never dealt with before, and it's a struggle. But I guess the thing is, you're always learning, then you're always getting that experience under your belt for the next time something like that comes along. So it's just experience, I think. When I first started, I was terrified to do anything. It was like, Jim, do you want to do this matte painting? And I'd be like, no. No. And then the first matte painting I ended up doing was for a film called The Man Who Saved Christmas, which was this, it's like a mansion with snow on it. And it was Christmas time and snow on the roads and snow on the other roofs of houses and all evergreen trees. And it was impossible to make it look legitimate. It just looked like a cheesy Christmas card. But, and then the camera pans out of a snow globe, which the painting is in, which was also pretty. And the TV movie was really cheesy. But I heard the client say, "Oh, it looks like Thomas Kincaid." And someone passed that on to me, and I was like, "Is that good?" And then I realized who Thomas Kincaid was. So,
that's great. You mentioned stress there a minute ago, and stress really is the killer of creativity. What do you think? Where is that sweet spot between being stressed enough to be kind of driven to get it done, but also not be stressed so much that you ruin the project?
Yeah,
it's so difficult to find, isn't it? I mean, I work in the TV industry and I work in the live TV industry, so we have a finite amount of time, just like you guys do on a feature, but we have to be live at this time. Right. We have to have that thing ready. And sometimes you do put things out that aren't quite right. But
sure, yeah. And it's also, you're not a machine, right? You're a human being, and maybe you're having an off day, or you're sick, or you feel down that day, or whatever, and it all affects your work. And the biggest thing for me with stress is because, people will like, is this ready yet? When do you think you're going to have this done? And you get that every week, and sometimes I don't have an answer because it's not going well. Mm-hmm. It's like, if I say I'll have it by the end of the day, then I've burned myself into locking myself into that corner. I think the biggest thing is just to walk away and breathe. And it's funny. I don't know if there are a lot of people like this or if it's just me, but I have moments where every week or two, I feel like I'm going to be fired. Mm-hmm. And I think I've heard, other artists talking that way. And the other side of that is sometimes I feel like my latest matte painting could be my last, or that, I'm only as good as my latest matte painting, right? Because the next one that comes along might not be as good as that one. And people will be like, well, why can't you make it as good as that previous one? The amount of volume constantly, that I have to day by day go through is if I thought about it too much, I think I'd, not lose my mind, but again, it would be stressful to look at it that way. So I just kind of try to take it day by day. And if I don't have something done, then I'll work on it the next day, early in the morning or whatever. But I think so far, I haven't been all that late with things. The problem with visual effects is there are bond companies involved. So if they don't make the date, it gets taken away from them. And they don't get paid or whatever. And I've seen that happening, in companies I've worked for, and then everyone's stressed and the CEO is stressed. And but then, film is stressful as well. Listening to your podcast and hearing, camera operators working on films and people getting fired, and just, it's a lot of jobs are stressful, but there's just something about film and television that's just beyond. Yeah. People don't quite have a grasp of it until they do. It's like, becoming a parent. You just don't know what it's like until it happens. You can't. Very good analogy. It's a perfect analogy.
Are you still able to draw for pleasure?
Yes.
Do you set aside time for that? Do you make sure you do that?
I force myself to. I've been building all these little models and things here and there, and from those I've been drawing from them because I'm working on a middle grade children's book, and working in Conte and sort of 14 by 11 size drawings, and I love the aspect of actually building the thing and then drawing from it, because I think there's a through line of communication to myself through that, because I know what it felt like to build it. Mm-hmm. So when I'm drawing it, I remember how it was to build it. So it makes it more fluid. And, I know some great children's authors, illustrators. One is Aaron Becker, And he used to work for Lucasfilm as well. He's a Caldecott winning children's book author, illustrator. He uses 3D software to do his model making that he'll draw from. And maybe not all the time, but in a lot of cases. And I've done that too, but I just don't get as much pleasure out of it because it feels more like my day job kind of thing.
You need the physical aspect of
yeah,
it.
and just getting like I built like 41. Let's see if I can grab one. 41 pianos for this scene in this children's book I've been working on, and painted them and made little keys and everything else. It's like meditative and therapeutic, especially after a day of digital matte painting. It's nice to do something completely different.
Yeah, that's very cool. Are you talk about getting reference photographs from shoots and things, and also just from the art department or the VFX department about what look they want. Do you find yourself ever just needing to break down the walls and go outside or visit a location to get inspiration?
Yeah, I used to.
Yeah, because I heard you speak in another one. I think it was the talk you did for the university where you were saying about where you initially grew up, a very sort of beautiful, naturally beautiful area.
Yeah. And then moved to a flat suburb in Canada.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think we've always noticed that when, let's say we need to do a forest extension or something, midst of summer, green forest everywhere, we'd always get a shot like that in February where there's snow everywhere and the trees are all spindly and just, there are no leaves in the trees and things like that. But I think most matte painters, and a lot of us don't, but we're supposed to have our own folders of photo reference that we've gathered over the years. And I do, but it was something I was working on recently. Yesterday, I was told the sky needs to be more moody. It needs to be a moodier sky to, I think, match the scene, but also to match the plate, the footage that was shot. And I went through folders, just one of my folders, and just found these really creepy, spooky skies that I had shot 3 months ago in, east of Toronto by the lake. So yeah. Did I answer the question there?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah. So you're using nature, and I was thinking do you actually physically go outside to get the inspiration? Like the photos is one thing, but do you ever kind of just need to get in the outdoors? I guess it's difficult because you're trying to do something from several hundred years ago. You're not going to get inspiration by walking around the mall.
And I live in a place full of condos. So, I have a pretty good photographic resource to draw from, so it would have to be something really specific.
And do you get to see the footage either side of where your matte painting is going to be? Yeah. Obviously, if it's like an establishing shot, that typical kind of setting the scene, do you then get to see the next 30 seconds or so? Yeah, we get to watch the edits. We're encouraged to watch them just so we know what's going on and given context for what's happening in the story. And for the most part, you sign NDAs and you're given scripts to read, so that you have context for it, and then you're prepared when the shots finally show up. But yeah, I did and I did some concepts based on the scripts, so that's always exciting to do. But yeah, we always have access for the most part to the edit, unless it's a scene we're not involved in. But yeah, and I haven't, for currently what I'm on, I haven't watched them all yet. And do you get people coming back to you from the production, like historical experts, for instance, that say, "Hang on, that would never happen," and then you have to kind of scratch it and start again. Yeah, and that's the show I'm on right now. The production designer his historic knowledge is incredible. So he's like, they wouldn't have that kind of architecture there. I've been asked to lose the windows because, back then, 9th, 10th century, the majority of windows are cut off bottoms of wine bottles. That's why you get those circular, windows, right? The circular patterns, full
giant panes of glass. If you see that in a movie, like a medieval movie, it's like, no, there are moments like that. But so yeah, I respect his opinion a lot. I'm better at it now than I used to be. I just, because you get enthusiastic and a little too fantastical about things, and they're like, no, they didn't have that kind of iron or whatever, that design or, that kind of thing. So yeah, I listen to the experts, I'm not going to argue with them.
And what's the dream job for you, Jim? Has it come along yet? Is there one sort of in your mind that you would love to work on?
Oh yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think would be an impossible dream would be to work on the original Star Wars movie in like '76. You know what I mean? Because the team's so small.
Yeah.
I think maybe more moving into sort of an art department kind of role as opposed to just matte painting. So a little more of that. Like I joined the Directors Guild of Canada, so my title now is according to them, is first assistant art director. So, if I can do more of that in the future, that would be nice. But at the same rate, honestly, the kind of dream job is working on my own stuff and having it be successful, illustration wise and drawing and painting, because I still love doing that.
Cool. I think that is a nice ending there, actually. I think that works really well. And I like the idea of the little sort of time travel perfect job, going back to the early days. It's like Nilo said to me, it was him, it was Joe, it was George, and it was Gary. And that was the team for a while on Empire, and just that small unit just coming up with those ideas. And I think that's the sort of most valuable work, isn't it? When you're working in a very, very small team. Like you say, you have your fingerprints all over it then. And you feel
and just, I mean, you kind of imagine they kind of riff together like a band, and they were chosen because they were good. So you have this small pool of talent. That would just be the best. I mean, I just love that. Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jim there. Great guy. We've continued to chat on Twitter and on DMs in the last few weeks. I really do enjoy his company. This really did give me a chance to better understand another part of the filmmaking process. Thanks to Jim for giving his time to come on the podcast, and a big thanks in putting me in touch with a future guest, hopefully, in the next couple of weeks. I also want to thank the composer, Michael Hubert Brown of MB Music, who kindly made the theme tune to the podcast. Mike really is a great guy and a wonderful musician. Do check out his site, embemusic.co.uk, if you'd like to work with him. Also, my good friend Paddy, who I've mentioned on the podcast a few times, we worked together doing some of my videos. He described the theme as the marker that lets him know there's a good hour of relaxed chat coming up, which I rather like. Cheers, Paddy. Upcoming episodes include my interview with documentarian John Lefkowitz, who made a documentary on Walter Murch, editor, sound designer and director extraordinaire. Also, Gary Rydstrom, Oscar-winning sound designer, is coming on. I can't wait to talk to him about Jurassic Park. I remember that soundscape just blew me away when I was, how old was I, 93, 18, 17. I also recently contacted Steve Spaz Williams, an ex-ILM animator, Jabba Sinner, and hoping he will get back to me soon. I've just spoken with Star Wars set decorator and alien art director Roger Christian. That will be coming up soon too. It was great to talk to him about that used universe, modifying real guns and finding those Graflex flashes in a camera shop. Do check out his book as well, The Cinema Alchemist. Thanks as always for joining me, and I hope you can join me again for the next episode of the Filmumentries podcast.